There's a couple things that make learning the notes on the guitar neck a little bit difficult. For one, there's a lot of them. We have 6 strings. A lot of other stringed instruments like violins, violas, cellos, basses have 4 strings. So already we have a little bit more information that we have to memorize. Another factor is that the intervals between strings on the guitar changes. As I mentioned, violin, viola, cello, bass, they all have 4 strings, but they also all have the same interval between the strings. On violin, viola, and cello, they're tuned in fifths, and on the bass, it's tuned in fourths. The first 4 strings of the guitar are tuned in fourths, and then we have a major third between the G string and the B string, and then we have another fourth between the B and the E. Even though there are nice repeatable patterns that you can memorize on the guitar or the violin or the cello or any of those instruments, those patterns change on the guitar depending on which strings that you're looking at. So this just adds a little bit of a layer of complexity and difficulty to when you're trying to memorize the notes. And the last thing is just a little bit of an interesting thing that's developed in the guitar community. It's actually possible to learn the entire instrument without really knowing what notes that you're playing at all. Through the use of playing by ear or playing with tabs or other tools that abstract the notes away from the guitar neck, we can learn to play the instrument very well without really having a solid understanding of what notes that we're playing while we play the instrument. I'm going to go over a couple different methods for learning the notes on the neck. The first few methods involve learning some structure about the instrument and using that information to try to help memorize the notes on the neck. I'm also going to go through a method that's more of a kinesthetic approach. So if you've struggled to learn the notes on the neck just by studying them before, this can provide you with a very hands-on approach to doing that. And the last thing I want to do is talk about a few heuristic things. They're not methodologies in themselves, but they are things that might make the notes a little bit more familiar as you keep studying the guitar. They're more concepts and ideas to integrate thinking about these notes with your everyday playing. The first method I'm going to talk about, you could really look at 2 ways. You could look at it as a brute force approach, where you just take each string and you memorize all the notes on that string. Then you move to the next string and you memorize all the notes on that string, and so forth until you feel like you have all the notes on the neck memorized. And for some people that might work. They can just go through, memorize all the notes on the neck. They feel like they can recall them when they're playing and they're good to go. But that's not how everyone's brains work, and sometimes we need to organize this information in a little bit more natural way, and then it becomes a little bit more intuitive. Instead of for each string trying to memorize all 12 notes, we could just memorize where the 7 natural notes are. So on the low E string, that's going to be E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and then we can repeat the E again. And then we could go up to our A string and we can say we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Already an advantage of just memorizing the natural notes versus all the notes is we already notate our music in terms of sharps and flats in terms of the natural notes. So if you're told to play a G, you can find the G. If you're told to play a G sharp, all you need to do is find a G and then raise it up a half step, and you found your G sharp. So you can reduce the amount of information that you need to memorize per string by just memorizing the natural notes as opposed to all 12 notes. If you decide to use this approach, one thing you'll want to take note of is where the notes line up between strings. On this lowest string, if I find the C and I play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and if I was to find the C on the next string over, this same exact C, same C, just a different string, and then I was to play the natural notes again on that string, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That pattern is exactly the same. The intervals between those notes are exactly the same. It's just shifted down by 5 frets. And the reason that it's shifted down by 5 frets is because these strings are tuned in perfect fourths. So you can take advantage of the fact that the first 4 strings are tuned in perfect fourths. And once you've memorized where these natural notes are on one of the strings, you can know that pattern just shifts over on the next string by 5 frets. In the beginning, I mentioned one of the things that makes guitar difficult is that not all the strings use the same interval. Between the G string and the B string, we have a major third instead of a perfect fourth. I mentioned that we shift the pattern 5 frets when we go from, the E string to the A string. But when we go from the G string to the B string, we then shift the pattern 4 frets. So that is something you need to be aware of. The fact that that is tuned as a major third instead of a perfect fourth does shift the patterns on the guitar. This next method is one that my guitar teacher developed, and it's a really nice logical way of breaking down the neck into easy areas. We start by saying we already know the open strings on the guitar, E, A, D, G, B, E. And I mentioned before, one of the advantages of learning the natural notes versus learning all the notes is when we notate music, we add sharps and flats. So if it says to play an E flat, we know we need to start at an E, and then we need to go down a half step to an E flat. If it says play a G sharp, we find our G, then we go up a half step to play a G sharp. If we think about it that way, every note we learn, we really learn 3 notes. Say we know where the D is, then we also know where the D sharp is, and we also know where the D flat is. So his approach is we don't need to memorize all the notes on the neck. If we just memorize a few easy areas, we'll always be within 1 half step of the note that we're interested in finding. And the 5 easy areas that are recommended are the open strings, which also is the 12th fret. Then we have the 3rd fret, the 7th fret, the 5th fret, and then the 10th fret. And it's recommended to memorize those positions a little bit out of order, so you're not just memorizing the information sequentially like we do in the last method. A really good way to approach this method is to print out a chart of the guitar neck and then start by writing the notes across the guitar neck for each one of those areas, and then look for patterns. And when I say patterns, I really mean anything that makes it easier to memorize the notes. For instance, if you go to the easy area on the 7th fret, the letters of this spell bead, B-E-A-D. That makes the easy area on the 7th fret very quick to memorize. Little things like that may seem silly, but it really does make it easier to recall information. This last method is the one that's a little bit more kinesthetic, and I'm going to link to the original lesson for the guy who created this because he does an excellent job of explaining it. I don't think it's necessary for me to go through all the details. I'm just going to go through a little bit high level so you know what to expect when you watch his video. As I mentioned for the first few methods, they're more about studying the structure of the guitar neck to make it easier to memorize where the notes are. This method is more about finding and playing through the notes in a very natural and intuitive way, so that if you're told to play a G, you don't have to think, okay, where is the G on the neck, and then you play it. You just let yourself kind of go to the G because you know the G is there already. To get that intuition, instead of memorizing where all the G's are, you practice by playing through them on each string. What I just did for the G, you eventually do for all the other notes. And then there's a methodology and exercises for combining these notes in different ways. It almost works like magic. You eventually stop thinking about like where these notes are on the neck, and you just know, like when you hear G, you just know that, oh, here are where the G's are. You don't have to relate the note to any kind of external knowledge or structure of the guitar to figure out the note. You just know which note it is. If you've struggled with other methods that involve studying the structure on the guitar neck, I highly recommend trying this method. It has a very different approach and it works very well. Last thing I want to do is talk about a few heuristic ideas that I think can make the notes feel a little less foreign and also get you thinking about them more in your daily playing. Classical musicians will usually be familiar with the notes on their instrument, whether they're playing guitar, violin, cello, bass. The way they've learned the instrument makes them have to know the notes on the neck. And it's because when they're learning the instrument, they have to learn to read sheet music. They use that sheet music to tell them which notes that they need to be playing on the instrument. So they just get a lot of practice seeing what note they need to play, finding it on the neck, and then playing it. And doing that over and over just reinforces and strengthens those neural pathways, so it becomes easier and quicker to figure out what note that you need to play on the instrument. Now, I'm not saying you need to learn how to read sheet music if you don't want to learn how to read sheet music, but there's a couple concepts that we can take from this that are very useful. For instance, if you're learning a new piece of music, even if you're learning from tabs, take a few minutes and think about which notes that you're playing when you're learning that song. Even if you don't do it every time you play the song, even if you only do it when you're learning a new piece of music, it will still start to build those connections and make it easier and easier each time that you go to do it. This next thing is something that I do a lot, and it's something that I've found very helpful for helping better understand the guitar neck. I'll take a riff or passage of music or something that I'm already familiar with how to play, and I'll move it to a new position in the neck, and I'll learn how to play the exact same passage. And doing that has helped me with a few things. It's helped me understand where things are the same on the neck. So I can play something here, but if I shift up and down a few strings, I can play the same thing here. And if I shift up and down a few more strings, I can play the same thing here. So it's helped me understand where things are the same on the guitar neck. The other thing it's helped me figure out is that how patterns change. As I've mentioned a couple times, we have that pesky major third interval between our G and our B strings. So that does shift some of the patterns. And as you keep practicing shifting these passages to different positions on the neck, you'll start to just build an intuitive feel for how patterns may change when you play them around the G and the B where you have that major third interval versus where you play them on the other strings where they're all perfect fourths. So I guess to summarize, it helps you figure out where things are the same and where they're different. So to review some of the heuristics, you can practice reading music and trying to play it on the guitar. You can practice when you're learning a new piece of music, just going through the notes as you learn them. You can say them out loud. You can think them in your head. Just some action to get you thinking about the notes while you're learning them so you can keep building those connections. And then after you've learned those passages, you can practice moving them to different parts of the neck. That's it for today. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.